Alright, so this video is going to be pretty different. I've never done a ranking video of any sort on this channel. As a matter of fact, my next video was supposed to be on Gachi Akuda, but seeing how the YouTube algorithm has been absolutely hoeing my channel, I thought, you know what, let's switch things up a bit. And as you read by the title, today I will be ranking all of One Piece's arcs. All of them except for Elbaf. I know some of you may be disappointed, but I wanted to wait for the arc to actually be finished first, but also because I haven't read a new chapter from the series in like a good few months now, I'd say. With all that being said, everything else is free game. I will be starting from the worst and making my way up to the best, give my reasons for their placements, and yada yada. Y'all already know how these rankings go. One Piece is one of my favorite series, and I haven't made a video on it in almost 3 years, so this should be fun. And as for rules, I didn't really make any for this list, but really I'm ranking them based off how much did I enjoy the arc, as well as how good I think it overall is, and just how good does it fit into the story. Anyways though, with all this yapping out the way, it's time to finally get into this list. Alright, so for number 32 and 31, these are the two arcs that I consider the worst in the series. And to be honest, it wasn't that much of a hard decision. And I don't think it's going to be a shock to anyone that I think Long Ring Long Land is the worst arc in the series. Yeah, this arc just really wasn't good. It's especially worse in the anime since they drag it out for like a couple more episodes and give it some anime original content, which isn't good. And Foxy was just such an annoying antagonist, oh my god. Even with this arc not being good and being at the bottom of the list, there's still some things I really do appreciate about it. There is some decent humor, and of course the Aokiji introduction at the end was absolutely hype, and I'll even say the Zoro and Sanji portion was somewhat entertaining. But even with that, I think the cons in this arc outweigh the pros. And when I was going through One Piece for the first time, I genuinely couldn't wait for this arc to be over. The same thing can be said about the next arc that I placed at the bottom, because at number 31, right next to Long Ring Long Land, I'm putting Amazon Lily. This arc gives us a proper introduction to Haki, as well as introduces us to Boa Hancock. My problem with this arc is that it's honestly pretty forgettable. The action wasn't anything too special, if I'm being honest, and I didn't really find too much of the plot of this arc to be that interesting, though I will admit Boa does have a really good backstory. But my biggest problem is that this arc drags on for so long, specifically in the anime. For some reason, Toei decided to stretch out 11 manga chapters into 14 episodes, which obviously isn't crazy for One Piece standards, but this arc truly just felt like a slog to get through. I will give it its props since it does establish Haki as a new power system and does show us how Luffy manages without his crew. But overall, again, this arc just isn't good. Quick side note, I think it's funny how the two worst arcs in the series for me are a part of the two best sagas. Coming up next at number 30, we have Syrup Village. I don't think this arc is as bad as the previous two, but it's definitely still mediocre. I know pre-time skip Usopp wasn't the greatest character, but I ain't gonna lie, this is definitely a low point for him. Kuro, the antagonist of this arc, was not too great either, I'm not gonna lie. And overall, I think Syrup Village went on longer than it really needed to. Personally, I think the live action did more justice to this arc. That's just me though. Now, the next few entries are all arcs that I feel pretty neutral towards. They're not necessarily bad or mediocre arcs or even good or great. They're just arcs that I don't really have much to say about. Like number 29, Reverse Mountain. It's a short and simple arc, and I think Laboon's story was pretty cool, but again, I really just don't have much to say. For number 28 and 27, it's a tie between the two first arcs of the series, being Orange Town and Romance Dawn. In Orange Town, we get introduced to Nami as well as Buggy, and again, I don't have that much input for this arc, though the most memorable thing for me is definitely the Chocho stuff. And as for Romance Dawn, I think it's a pretty solid introductory arc, and it's even more interesting to see how far the series has come since then. Again, neither of them are bad, but I really just don't have much to say about them. And number 26, hold on. Okay, so yeah, number 26, I have Whiskey Peak. Just like the last few entries, it's another short arc, but it definitely did what it needed to do, and that was to create more tension and build up for the main antagonist of this saga. This, of course, being Baroque Works. Of course, the most memorable part of this arc for me was definitely the sequence with Zoro taking down the Baroque Works members, but I also can't forget about Robin's introduction, who at this point in the story is known as Miss All Sunday. This was definitely one of the more shocking moments at this point in the series, and it was very effective. Whiskey Peak is a pretty decent arc, but it's definitely not touching some of the later stuff on this list. But up next at number 25, I have Loguetown, the final arc of the East Blue saga, and I can't lie, it does pretty well at closing out this saga. We get some pretty good lore about the old generation, and of course you had Dragon's iconic entrance at the end, and overall I thought Loguetown was pretty decent. Right after this, in the next spot, I have the Return to Sabaody arc, which is the first post time skip entry on this list. This is where we finally get to see the Straw Hats reunite after 2 years of being separated from each other. Nothing else all too major happens in this arc, but it was great to see the Straw Hats post time skips designs for the first time. Also, seeing the monster trio come back and just absolutely kick ass was so sick. And overall, I think it was a good way to start off this new era of the series. Up next, we got Little Garden for number 23. This arc has some pretty cool moments and also introduced us to the Giants. And I really feel like this is an arc that Oda just wanted to flex his world building abilities. This place has such a cool concept, basically being this prehistoric untouched location with the two giants on the island, Dory and Bragi, constantly sparring against each other. And I think this is one of the more unique early One Piece locations. I will say as a whole, this arc didn't do anything too special, and Mr. 3 was a pretty mid antagonist. But even with that being said, this is still a solid arc. Coming in at number 22, we have Punk Hazard. Punk Hazard is honestly an interesting case. I think this arc has some really fire moments. The concept for this island was really cool. You got some great fights like Zoro versus Monet and Law versus Virgo, which, speaking of Law, he absolutely stole the show this arc. And there's a few other great things I can mention, but the main thing holding this arc back is that I think that there was just way too damn much going on. You had the Kinyemon and Mononosuke stuff, then you had the body swap thing, there was also the whole slimy portion, and you had the kids subplot throughout this arc, etc, etc. This arc was just a little congested when it came to content, but it's still a solid arc, and did a decent job when it came to building up for Dressrosa. Up next for 21, I'm giving it to Fishman Island. This may be a hot take, but I think this arc is kinda overhated, and dare I even say underrated. I only have it at number 21, so it's not a great or really good arc, but it's definitely not as bad as people make it out to be. The themes that this arc covers, like racism and discrimination, were done very well, and the scene with Luffy and Jinbei's blood transfusion was a beautiful way to close them out. There's also Hody, who I know a lot of people don't really like, but I think he was a good representation of how your hatred can spiral out of control. It just sucks that him and the other fishmen didn't really pose as major threats, because these guys got cooked. But it does give us one of the coolest scenes where Luffy takes down 100,000 fishmen with just his Conqueror's Haki. This will always be one of my favorite Luffy moments. With all of that, I still do have some critiques. I didn't really care too much about a lot of the arc side plots, and then of course you have all the Sanji stuff. But even with the critiques, I think this arc is still solid, and is definitely far from being one of the worst. Now entering the top 20, the next entry we have is Drum Island, the arc that introduces us to Chopper, who has one of my favorite introductions out of the Straw Hats, and I thought his backstory with Dr. Hiralook was really good, and it has one of the most impactful messages in the series, specifically the part where Hiralook basically says that a man only dies when he's forgotten. And ever since watching that for the first time, this is a speech that has stuck with me even till now. Outside of Chopper's backstory, you have one of Luffy's best moments where he climbs up Drum Mountain with Nami and Sanji, which is a huge highlight from the Alabasta saga. Overall, this was a pretty good arc, though the beginning was a bit slow and Wapol is definitely a bottom tier antagonist, but even that isn't enough to bring this arc lower in the rankings. Up next at number 19, I have Thriller Bark. Honestly, for some reason this just feels like a high ranking, but then I had to consider just how many arcs this series has, as well as all the arcs below it, and I'm like, nah, I wouldn't put Thriller Bark under any of those. The main reason Thriller Bark is here though is because of its last like 10-ish episodes. Within this final stretch of the arc, we get Nightmare Luffy, the defeat of Gecko Moria, Luffy receiving Ace's Vivre card, Brooks' backstory, and of course nothing happened. Just a whole bunch of huge moments for the series, and I'm gonna be honest, yeah, this portion carries this arc on its back, I'm not gonna lie, because if it wasn't for this final stretch, this arc would be much lower. I mean, before all of this, there was some decent humor. Zoro versus Ryuma was an amazing fight, and Usopp gets some good character development, but that's really all I have to compliment this arc for in its earlier portions. Again, that final stretch is what's really driving Thriller Bark home. For number 18, I'm gonna give it to Baratie, probably the most consistent arc in the East Blue in terms of quality, and during my first time going through the series, I thoroughly enjoyed it. You had some really good moments like Zoro versus Mihawk, and of course Sanji's backstory, and I will say Don Krieg isn't the greatest villain, but his fight with Luffy was really good, and I'm gonna be real, this is the arc that really hooked me into the show, though it is followed up by an even better arc that I'll talk about soon. At number 17, I'm gonna give it to Reverie. This arc did such a great job at creating hype. Coming off of Whole Cake Island, we get a huge update for One Piece's world. We get the Reverie event where every world leader goes to meet. This in turn gave us a chance to see a bunch of characters that we hadn't seen in a while. Not only that, but we get some much needed screen time of the revolutionaries. And this is the arc where Luffy's bounty finally touches 1 billion. But the most memorable thing from this arc for me was the reveal of Emu. who is still one of the most mysterious characters in the entire series. This arc was short, but it did such a great job at setting things up that will play huge roles in the final saga. Alright, so that concludes the first half of this list. I was originally intending for this ranking to be one big video, but I haven't completely finished it yet, that's the problem. And I wanted to get at least one video out for January. So instead, I'm uploading the first half of the list today, and the second half should be uploaded some point within the next few days. And then I think eventually I'm just gonna go ahead and combine the two. But yeah, with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and end the video here. Hope y'all enjoyed, and stay tuned for the next part.